Hello there, my name is Sixo, but more on that later, as now it's time to check out the latest Transformers collaborative effort, which of course is this rather spectacular specimen. It's Balvintron. Yeah, I don't really get it either, but never mind. Anyway, before we begin, I should mention that today's review is brought to you by TF Source, so I'll throw a link to their site in the video description below. I'd also be very grateful if you could leave me a like for this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also in the description is a link to my Patreon, where in exchange for your support you can get access to a ton of perks, including exclusive galleries and early access to videos such as this. Finally, there's a link to my Redbubble store, where you can pick up a huge range of different designs, including loads of my photos across all kinds of different merch. I'm uploading new ideas all the time, so be sure to check it out and treat yourself. And here is the toy in its box, and as I mentioned, this is a Transformers collaborative effort, although perhaps not one like you would have imagined, as whilst up until now they've mostly been crossovers with established movie franchises that bring classic vehicles to life, this release is a little bit different, as it's a joint effort with a musician instead. Not that that's entirely unheard of in Transformers history, mind. And look, I'm going to be right royally honest and just flat out admit that I'd never even heard of J Balvin before this thing popped up, but hey, at least the toy looks pretty colourful. As does the box, which I'm actually quite a fan of. The shape of it reminds me of the old Transformers collection packaging in a weird way, although the palette on offer here really is its own thing entirely. But of course it's the contents that we're here to see, although in this case I honestly was not sure if I really wanted to give it a go or not when it was first unveiled. After all, it's a pretty gaudy makeover of a classic toy with a colour scheme that's nothing shy of an assault on the eyes and some additional big-ass weapons to boot. Then I remembered that I love that kind of stuff and I was all in, naturally. Anyway, included in the box are 2 cassettes, with Energy, a buzzsaw being a white repaint of the classic buzzsaw and laserbeak mold, and Vibras Stripes, which is a new version of the original Stripes toy from 2012, but more on that in a moment. Then you have the weapons for both of them, all of which are taken from previous molds, as is the ridiculously massive purple and silver double-barreled cannon, and the hugely colourful blast effect pieces to go with it. Completing this package are a set of instructions, and of course the headline act himself, J Balvintron, who, if you hadn't guessed it yet, is a very vibrant repaint of the classic Generation 1 Soundwave toy from 1984, although this is one of the most extensive makeovers it's had in all that time. Now I should start by saying that this is a design I have great affection for already, having picked up my first copy of it during a teenage toy fair expedition with my late uncle back in the 90s. And whilst I do think that it's a design that stands the test of time and holds up even today, the irony of a 1980s microcassette player being released for a new audience in this day and age is not entirely lost on me. Still, this is the G1 Soundwave toy like you've never seen it before, with that new yellow colour scheme being a real showstopper and perhaps unsurprisingly causing a lot of people to suggest that this repaint looks like it could have hailed from the Generation 2 era, if anything. Of course, the other main feature here are the tampos, all of which are emblematic of the smiley face logo that J Balvin himself is regularly associated with, alongside his use of vivid colours. There's also a neat blue trim around the edges of the clear cassette door, and the shiny chromed silver set of buttons atop a tampoed set of record and stop symbols. And I think it all looks pretty good, or at the very least so spectacularly tacky that it loops back round into the realm of good somehow. Maybe. Look, I'm sure it won't be to everyone's taste, but it's kind of working for me so far. Now, just like every use of this toy design these days, the chrome buttons are moulded from one solid protruding piece of plastic with the hinges of the cassette door attached at the sides. You will see a similar setup on all reissued versions of the G1 Soundwave mold going all the way back to the 1980s, as this was a running change made by Takara on the original release, with only the very first 1984 toys having the separate chrome buttons recessed behind a piece of opaque plastic. The buttons themselves don't actually work, although there are other features to occupy you here, including a volume control and a slider button on the sides of the tape deck. You also still have that opening battery compartment to the rear, despite this being the first use of the classic Soundwave mold to not come equipped with the pair of weapons that turn into the corresponding batteries, which I have to say is a bit of a major bummer in my opinion, as that was always one of the features that I really adored about this design. Naturally though, the main gimmick here is the cassette door, which can be activated by pushing the button up top, and I'm pleased to report that the mechanism on this feels super satisfying, opening with a more pronounced punch than even my vintage original. Then you can go ahead and load either of the 2 cassettes into the compartment and close it up. And although they can only fit one at a time, they both give you a very different look depending on which you opt for. The cassettes themselves are pretty terrific, and I think if I'm honest, form a major part of my desire to see this set in hand to begin with. They're both designed to mimic different J Balvin albums, with Energy, a buzzsaw being modelled after the 2016 release Energia, and Vibras Stripes being a very clear homage to 2018's Vibras. They look very colourful and quite different different to previous G1 cassettes, including both the original versions of Buzzsaw and Stripes even. And I have to say, I think they make a wonderful addition to my burgeoning collection overall. I can't get enough of these guys. As for J Balvintron, he takes his rightful place amongst the other versions of the G1 Soundwave toy that I already own, arguably vying with the 2013 Shattered Glass release, for which is the most unusual in my collection. Of course, there's more to come, as now it's time to check out Transformation. Right, that's Transformation done, and there's really nothing there to test anyone, although I still admire the G1 Soundwave scheme for being one for the ages. The result is every bit as colourful as you would expect, and certainly breathes new life into an already very familiar toy. Again, I'm quite sure this is going to divide opinion quite a bit, but for my money, it's certainly a bit of fun to see, even if there are still some nitpicks to be had here. The classic Soundwave noggin remains as great as ever, although here it's been given a multicoloured makeover, with the rainbow palette on offer being a direct nod to J Balvin's own love of sporting such a hairstyle. I also quite enjoy the addition of the bright blue on areas such as the arms, which helps to break up that block yellow overall. That said, it looks a bit less well applied on the thighs, with some sloppy paint applications making this appear a bit rough around the edges here if anything. Then there are numerous factory applied foil stickers on this toy, so that saved you a job versus typical releases of this mould, and on the whole they seem like they've been very neatly done as well, with the examples on his shoulders and knees both having been reworked slightly to include that J Balvin electricity symbol. Annoyingly though, the wrist stickers on my copy are very haphazard, so that's something I'll need to try and fix myself, I suppose. I also found that the head on my copy won't sit properly either, meaning that he looks like he's permanently gazing upwards. Pretty disappointing for a high profile toy of this kind in my opinion. Overall though, he feels very sturdy and solid, to the point where you perhaps wouldn't even guess that this is a mould that's now 4 decades old. It's such a shame then that some of the elements in the finish are letting the side down a bit. One area that maybe does feel a touch dated though is the articulation, of course, with only minimal movement over the whole body being available in a bit of a change of pace to what we typically expect today. It's not something that bothers me at all. I love G1 toys after all, but it's worth bearing in mind if you're new to this kind of thing. Then you can equip J Balvintron with that massive double barrel gun, which is a repainted version of the weapon that comes packaged with the recent Siege Jetfire figure. It looks every bit as ridiculous as it should, and almost certainly dials up the Generation 2 vibes a notch, although should you prefer, you can go ahead and split it apart into 2 separate weapons instead, each of which can then be pegged into J Balvintron's hands for a spot of dual-wielding action. I have to say that I really am missing the battery weapons still, and I can't help but feel that the G1 Soundwave design looks a little naked without its signature shoulder cannon especially, but at least those rifles are compensating for it a little. Then you have those blast effect pieces, also originally from Siege Jetfire. They peg into the ends of the guns, although with one very significant drawback. Yep, the combo of both guns and blast effect pieces, meaning that there's now 0 chance of the toy being able to stand up properly, which seems to me to be a major oversight on this release. Still, the blast effect pieces themselves look really spiffing and can also be split into 3 to form various colourful options for how you might want to display this toy, so maybe that's something. Then we come to the 2 cassette companions, both of which add to the fun on offer. Energia Buzzsaw looks every bit as bizarre as I would have hoped for, and weirdly now features a thickly painted head where it's always just been bare plastic on every previous version of this mould. I can't help think that it would have looked better to follow tradition in this case, but overall I like the colour scheme going on. He also comes with his shiny chrome weapons, which here are the versions with shortened down barrels, as is typical of Hasbro re-releases compared to the longer ones that you find on any Takara reissues. It all sets him apart from the other uses of the Buzzsaw mould and makes him a welcome addition to the ranks all told. Vibras Stripes also looks fantastic here, with a striking colour scheme and some eye-catching black detailing up top too, all of which makes him a fantastic counterpart to the original Stripes, which came packaged with Encore Twincast in 2012. That toy was distinct from the original mold, which was of course 1984's Ravage, in that it featured a gold set of weapons from the 1986 Steeljaw toy instead of Ravage's own smaller rocket launchers. Although here Vibras Stripes returns to his roots and now comes with a gold set of the vintage Ravage weapons in their place, presumably to mix things up a bit but also making this Stripes a straight up Ravage repaint for the first time. All told, I love the inclusion of these two and they haven't disappointed one bit now that I have this package in hand. Overall, I'd say they formed the most trustworthy part of this entire set, sidestepping some of the nitpicks that mar the main character in this case, and elevating this release as a whole. That said, it's great fun to see J Balvintron lined up next to previous versions of the Soundwave toy, and even if this isn't exactly its most polished outing, it's going to be a memorable one all the same. Besides, in so many ways, this is indeed the Generation 2 Soundwave repaint that we never had at the time. I mean that both in terms of the positives, including the so garish it's somehow awesome colour scheme, and the undeniably over-the-top accessories that have been mercilessly slapped on from another toy. Yet there's also evidence of some of the less desirable elements of the vintage G2 toys present here, in that it's a repainted version of a classic toy that can't quite claim the same fit and finish as the original. That's never been a major grumble of mine in regards to the 90s G2 toys, because they're a product of their time in so many ways. But for a major new collaborative release in 2021, I think we should be expecting a little bit better somehow. It leaves me feeling that people may end up being ever so slightly underwhelmed on this release, which is a shame as reissues like this can be done to a fantastic standard, as evidenced by the recent Walmart example. All in all, it's still a lot of fun to see something like this being realised though, and I really would love to see more classic G1 toys being given new, weird and wonderful colour schemes in similar fashion. I guess it all leaves me on a bit of a mixed note if anything, as whilst the flaws aren't enough for me to suggest you steer clear, I would say that it's worth knowing that this package isn't perfect before you decide to dive on in either. That said, I think on balance, if you're after a fun outing for the Soundwave mold, or you just want a couple of quirky extra G1 cassettes to add to your collection, then really, this mostly delivers. So on that basis, it's a somewhat understated and rather cautionary toot. Now, as already mentioned, you'll find a link to TF Source's site in the video description below, so do check them out for all your Transformers and third-party needs. There are also links to both my Patreon and my Redbubble store, so be sure to take a look at those if you want to support me in exchange for some awesome perks and merch. Finally, I'd love it if you could drop me a like for today's video, please, and don't forget to let me know your thoughts on this toy. Do you like what you see, or not so sure? Otherwise, that's it from me, so thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day. TTFN.